We had our Q&A around general statutory requirements around remote learning. And today's session really focuses on supporting our vulnerable pupils, particularly pupils with SEND, and how to best support staff in terms of delivering remote learning. And we're going to have a quick look at well-being of your school community as well. Certainly the schools that I've been in touch with are doing an absolutely fantastic job at looking after their staff at this time. And we hope that you perhaps get some additional information today, but this forum really is about you sharing good practice as well. If you've got really good things that you're doing to share, please feel free to. We really want these sessions to be us facilitating and you having that opportunity to ask questions, but to share your practices too, because everything's coming thick and fast, isn't it? And we want to make sure that you're getting what you need. Are people not?
Yeah, I think we've got some issues with hearing.
Let me turn my audio on and off. How's that? Can you hear me? Very echoey. You can hear me now, Chris. Great. All good, all good. Okay, I've got lots of people who can hear me, so I'm going to carry on.
If you can't hear, just pop it in the chat and we'll see what we can do.
Andy, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what the problem is because lots of people can hear. You may want to try logging out and in again, colleagues. I'll carry on.
One suggestion is that both Kath and I turn off our microphones. I think that might be helpful just while you're speaking, Amanda.
Okay, no worries. Sorry, colleagues, the joys of virtual and remote sessions, eh? It's painful at times, isn't it? I know that you'll sympathise with us because you are in the very same position a lot of the time yourselves, I know. Okay. So yeah, this is release number 2 of 3. So there's another one coming out tomorrow around assessment and feedback. We hope you'll find that equally useful. There will be a Q&A next Thursday on that one. Do make sure that you share these releases with your leadership teams and Senkos today. If you haven't had that opportunity yet, the links do come out afterwards, or even if you just share these slides, that would be really helpful. All right. Now, earlier this week, or it could have been last week, there was a bulletin sent to schools. 2 things came out. First of all, there was Leading SEND, what settings need to consider, which was an update from last terms, updated with all the kind of requirements around getting help with remote education in relation to SEND practice in schools at this time. So that document is on the LDP website. And then following that, we had a Senko Guide 9 from our new SEN advisor, Tanya Haig, came out earlier this week to really support Senkos further with remote education. Now, I have put that, I'm hoping, bear with me, colleagues. That's there, hopefully displaying on your screen now. That came to schools, I think, on Monday. So if you haven't had that, that will have gone to your Senko if they subscribe to the Send updates. All right, now that literally came out a couple of days ago. So that supports everything that I'm talking about today, and is an additional Send-specific piece of information. Just going back to where I was, bear with me. Clever stuff. Right. Yeah, so this information really documented how you can access funding and technology for those complex pupils where they are struggling to access education at home. So those links there will help you if that's something that you need. But we want to talk more generally about SEND today. And as I say, that was from the Leading SEND update that came out. Here are the links to the SEND updates. Okay, hopefully you've seen that. This hyperlink is a little bit temperamental. If you right click on it, it should take you to the Essential Guide 9. and really thinking about your most complex learners and how they're accessing remote learning. Now, the schools I've spoken to at the moment have most of their EHCP pupils are in school. But we do have some with, for example, with medical needs or with particularly complex SEN who aren't in school. And it's those pupils really that we want to make sure that we're reaching. And it's about you knowing what the story is for each of those families. If that's not you personally, then it would be your SENCO. And documenting those conversations. Do you know those pupils who aren't in school, and do you know how they're being educated at this time? Because this lockdown differs from the first lockdown that we had in the EHCP processes, as this slide shows, hasn't been relaxed. All right, so if you've got pupils with SEN and EHCPs, then all of the provision that you identified, either as part of their IEP or as part of their EHCP, still applies. So that's really one of the biggest differences that we want to get across. Devon have produced a helpful framework to support you in having conversations. The framework is not a requirement that you return that to Devon. Risk assessments are for individual pupils, but this EHCP discussion framework isn't. It's just suggested there to help you. Your SENCOs will have had this, but I want you to be aware of it, in that where you have EHCP pupils who've got things in their plan that you've had to tailor or adjust, or you are struggling to deliver at this time, that you have a document of the conversation you've had with families so that you can ensure there's an evidence trail of how you've adjusted provision and an agreement between you and home. And that's really, really important at the moment because EHCPs are legal documents, as you know. If there's no relaxation in what's in them, then those young people, those children, have an entitlement to that provision. And I think one of the challenges that we have in schools at the moment is things like physio or OT or speech and language therapies, those sorts of things that might happen in your school on a more regular basis usually. There's a challenge in terms of how you deliver that at home. And this is where this discussion form might come into its own for you in terms of tailoring that provision or adjusting it with things that you might send home or suggestions that an outside professional might give you for those things to happen at home if the child can't attend school. Okay, it's about really you documenting everything that can be done and showing that rather than being a school that steps back and says, well, unfortunately that child with an EHCP, we can't do that, and that's just a flat sort of no response, but really just being the school that reach out and say, okay, well, we're struggling with this, but we can do this and we will provide that, and having that documentation. Struggling with my slides going in a funny order here. Sorry. Okay, I wanted to just draw your attention really. When I was preparing these slides, I was thinking, at the moment there's so much documentation and advice and guidance and statutory stuff coming out. It's hard to see the wood for the trees, and I want you to cling on to the fact that in the Code of Practice there's a lot of information and text around the assess, plan, do, review process, and your SENCOs will be familiar with this. If as a head teacher this stuff isn't second nature to you, it will be to your SENCO. So the important thing for you to know is that the assess, plan, do, review cycle is exactly what you need to be applying at this time in the same way that you do in school. All right, so whether a child is on or off site, this is what you need to be focusing on. All right, so when you're assessing, what do the learners with SEN know? Where are they in their learning plans? All right, looking at maybe recent scores or maybe more soft feedback that you hold for them, information that you've got. It doesn't have to be just test scores or numbers, all right? How can you assess their remote learning and where they are? How do they feel about school? Have you got some pupil feedback, you know, from them, from conversations that might be having between home and school at this time? What can they achieve? Focus on what's possible rather than what isn't, all right, as part of that assess bit. And then in terms of planning, how are teachers planning remote learning that's appropriate for them? It's about good differentiation off-site as well as in school. Can some things be done with a family member? Could support staff be helping one-to-one with children? If they're attending in school, their provisional really does need to be in place as it was before, or perhaps tailored slightly because of bubbles and other adjustments that are being made. But really and truly, if they're off-site, then you want to be looking at everything in their plan and adjusting. Remember that small things can make a big difference. Even a daily check-in with a child can make a massive difference in terms of their engagement with school. So you've got your assess, your plan, your do, and your review. Lots of schools are using teacher-led sessions or videos. Can those be adapted for one-to-one with a child, with a TA or a teacher? Just checking in with that child, going back over learning, pre-teaching. Could there be an opportunity where vocabulary is visited prior to an input, or perhaps followed up afterwards? Try to maintain familiarity and routine to the learning that you plan for children with SEN. Take a structured approach. I really like something Helen said last week, the whole kind of almost taking the child remotely by the hand. You know, I'll do one, we'll do one together, then you do one. You know, really doing a lot of that modelling for the child so that they can access what they're presented with learning wise. Could you consider an individual timetable for some pupils? I appreciate that staffing is really complicated at the moment, but is there room for a TA to perhaps do that with some of your SEN pupils or a little group of them? I hope you saw that I put some links there to some good resources. I didn't want to overload you, but there are some good things to access there. And as part of that assess, plan, do review, it's likely that your SEN pupils are going to need a more regular review. It doesn't necessarily have to be formally in writing, but a review of how their learning's going. How are their targets being addressed if they have got individual learning plans or IEPs? How are they being reviewed at the moment? I would aim for fortnightly, but if you can do weekly, that's even better, with somebody familiar, a teacher or a TA, what needs to be adjusted for them. So it's that constant revisiting on that assess, plan, do, review. See what's working, do more of what's working, and make sure that you really step up that communication with those families. I know this is all bread and butter stuff to you, but I think at the moment it's easy to lose sight of that bread and butter stuff. So really today's session is to serve as a reminder to you about what is important, and you know how to do this. The fact that it's remote just means it needs adjusting. It doesn't mean it all goes out the window and has to look wildly different. Okay. Remember that most of your SEN families will be wanting to help their children as much as possible, but they're going to be challenged in terms of time, particularly if they're working parents as well. So we also know that some of our complex children come from complex families. And so what does the family need to have adjusted in terms of how you communicate with them? Yeah. And just a little note really to you to remember that those pupils who have EHCPs are one thing, and that is really important that we implement as much as we can of their EHCP provision, but your SEN support pupils matter too. And my concern is that those SEN support pupils are going to be the ones that when we do reopen fully are going to have really dropped behind, because schools will have focused hugely on EHCP provision, and that kind of group of K students will have had perhaps their targets and the things that were in place in school suddenly that gap is going to get wider. And we know that at the end, I've cited a report that's got some sort of factual stuff in there for you to read. Do you have any support staff at home at the moment who could be used for supporting remote learning? Perhaps you've got staff who are having to shield or who are working at home and could, with a bit of IT support or a little bit of training, could actually be doing some check-ins and things like that for you. I've put some suggestions here. Could they be used for reading, for daily check-ins, pre-teaching? Don't forget about your COVID catch-up funding. There's going to be, you know, an accountability aspect to that moving forward. And as children return to school, an expectation that that planning that you've done for COVID catch-up is maintained, and that momentum for that is brought back to the fore. So, you know, could your TAs be used in that way at this time? Could there be pastoral check-in groups for pupils? Perhaps there's some kind of well-being group, or I'm thinking at primary or secondary level that support staff could be running for you or for your teachers at this time. Could your support staff be leading bubbles whilst a teacher checks in or teaches a vulnerable child one-to-one for something specific? I've talked about support staff potentially needing IT access from home. Or perhaps your support staff could be used for preparing paper copies of resources or packs. I know that some schools are really reaching families well in this way, where families are struggling with broadband width, or they're struggling because their child simply cannot access IT all day long, or perhaps their needs are such that that isn't something that's appropriate for them for the amount of hours that we're trying to provide education for. And so paper packs are actually really helping to supplement what's going on. So it doesn't always have to be IT. It doesn't always have to be a live lesson. It has to be learning off-site remotely. And schools are being creative about the ways that they do that. Bear with me, sorry. Okay, yeah, I've put some links in here about pupil well-being. I've talked briefly about check-ins for pupils, possibly using your support staff or teachers if possible. And there are some resources, advice and training available through these links, which you may have had a chance to look at over the course of the week. I also want you to consider here staff wellbeing. You may have heard about TalkWorks. I think actually in Dawn Stabb's bulletin last week, the TalkWorks workshops did get re-advertised again. These are free if you're having staff who are really struggling, who really need that forum. The details are there and the website there for you to go to if you think that might be something to disseminate on your staff. Are you having regular check-ins with your staff to check that they're okay, particularly if they're shielding and they're working from home? Perhaps you could set up staff buddy systems. We also do run the SEN helpline every Tuesday from 12 till 4 during term time. That is more for SENCOs who need support in terms of their workload and issues that they might be facing. So if your SENCO is struggling to sort of see the wood for the trees and you really need your SENCO to access some support, then please do remind them. I'm sure they know, but please remind them of that number. We do man that every week. It's a Devon Commission service for your schools. Okay. So yeah, do you know your staff are okay? How do you know they're okay? And do you know what to do if they're not? And again, in the chat, if you've got some really creative ways, I know Helen and Kath are looking at the chat. I'm trying not to look at it because I find it distracting while I'm presenting. But yeah, do please share creative ways that you're doing that, because at the moment, I think cake and chocolate in the staff room's a bit of a no-no, isn't it? Because of bubbles and everything else. So how are you managing to look after each other? I hope you are getting that opportunity. I wanted also to drop a slide in here about DSLS, which I'm sure you're all aware of. There's just contact emails and numbers there for you. I don't know if Mel is in our webinar today. Mel Smallwood, I know. Mel, if there's anything that you want to add regarding DSLS, then do feel free to put that in the chat. I know that Mel represents, but also really just to say to you colleagues, you know, our advisory team at LDP, we are here for you. We are very much about support and challenge as a team. And at this time, we're really ramping up the support aspect of that. We're really trying to give you things that support you rather than make you feel got at. And we're desperately trying to encourage you to get in touch with us if you need support, if you just need someone to listen and to give that, I suppose, another professional dimension to your thinking. If you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling like you're not quite sure where to go with something, we may not have all the answers all of the time, but we are 100% happy to have those conversations with you. Please do contact your advisor if you need to or want to, okay, in a non-judgmental way. We are really wanting to support you at such a challenging time. I finished the presentation for you for release 2, just with some places to go for further information. Nathan did publish a report some of you might have seen last week. It was a little depressing, if I'm honest. It talks about the growing divide between SEN and non-SEN pupils at this time, and it predicts you know, the gap that we're going to see. And it talks about increasing support for remote learning for pupils with SEN at this time. And we absolutely must increase support for those SEN pupils in school and not in school. Otherwise, that gap is going to be phenomenally large to close. I've given you that report. Isn't that long actually, so if you do find time to read it, I think you will find it interesting, and to perhaps pass that on to your pastoral teams or to your Senko. We also, I've put the link there for our strategic leadership of SEND support pages on our website. All the Senko guides are there, including guide 9, which is the one I showed you briefly at the start of this presentation. I'll put that back up in a minute or two. So yeah, please be aware that SEN pupils are even more vulnerable at this time. And really, yeah, we do have a duty to be doing everything that we possibly can for those families. There's also support via the Devon County Council SEND pages. I like this article in TES last week, 4 tips for teaching SEND students remotely. It's palatable, it's quite short, and it gives you just some good solid advice if you wanted to print that out and distribute it at school. It's a nice easy one to digest. And also to draw your attention to our ethnic minority and traveller services. If you have got families with EAL, they are particularly isolated at this time, and there are some additional resources on our website for those families. Okay, just to finish off with, there was a zip file with release 2, and I did put some safeguarding documentation in there. We know that vulnerable pupils, and particularly SEN pupils, are even more at risk during times like this. SEN pupils are hugely vulnerable, more so than non-SEN pupils, for all sorts of reasons that you will know. There are some 1-minute guides available. I put the new threshold tool in, and all sorts of online safety documentation for you there. There were 5 documents in that zip file. I tried to keep it short for you because I know you're bombarded, but there are some documents that you might want to just consider sending out to your families around protecting children at this time while they're learning at home and while they're accessing online learning and various platforms and websites and those sorts of things. So some of it was for you, the safeguarding policy appendix, the threshold tool, etc. Some of it, 2 of the articles were for you to send on to families. Okay, so I know when you see a zip file sent over, it can be a bit daunting and you think, oh my goodness me, not more reading. But actually, it's quite short and hopefully of use to you. Okay, so before we move on, I want to just open the chat box now. Helen, Kath, do you want to unmute? Have we had any questions already? And is there anything you want to add to that presentation? I don't want to go on too much longer because I'll take up the question time.
Yes, just 1 second while I scroll back through the chat. There was a question from Katie Gray. Katie, I'm going to read it out because Amanda is finding it quite difficult to see the chat at the moment. So forgive me for the whole thing.
It's an IT issue, sorry.
Things at the moment. Her question is, if you have EHCP children who put staff at risk, spitting, biting, needing positive handling, I believe the DFE guidance is that they should still be in school. The Babcock safeguarding appendix says heads can use professional judgment about whether they are entitled to be in school. This is causing upset amongst my staff team who say the children shouldn't be in school as it's putting staff at risk. I'm confused. Actually, it's worth just reading the comment below. Nassim has kindly said, we had the same issue in the first lockdown with a child that was licking everything. We spoke with Amanda, who supported us having the child in part-time, so it was worth reading those two things together.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, Katie, and it's a very emotive one because quite rightly staff get very worried about children who are licking, spitting, etc. So there's a kind of bit of a multi-pronged approach to this. I've just put the Senko Guide 9 up again, just in case, because it has got relevant links to it. But essentially, if you've got a complex pupil like that, you need to be risk assess, or your Senko needs to be risk assessing that pupil first and foremost about when they should be in school and what the provision is when they are in school. That's the first thing. We need to be focusing on what we can do. So it may not be appropriate that that child is in 100% of the time, but there might be some things that the child can access and the rest of the time at home. So that risk assessment needs to be completed initially by the school and talked through with the family, and then the family and the school hopefully coming to an agreement about which activities, which parts of school life are appropriate at the moment and when being at home is appropriate. Also to remind your staff, and you will want to make your own decisions about this as school leaders, that if your staff feel more comfortable wearing PPE at that time, if they are working one-to-one with a child, then they are perfectly entitled to do so. So you've got the risk assessment, you've got the PPE aspect, you've got the option of a part-time timetable if that is something that you want to explore. And the other thing that I would say is to involve, it sounds to me, if you have a complex pupil like that, that you will have outside professional involvement in some way, shape or form. And I would be consulting with those outside professionals in terms of what else could be done to support. Often children are licking or spitting and those sorts of things due to heightened anxiety. So sometimes an approach where you're reducing anxiety can actually have the effect of reducing the behaviours. But again, I would be contacting the outside professionals and consulting on their expertise with that. So your Senko will know that we have teams within LDP for SEMH, for communication and interaction, physical and sensory. So if you have any of those pupils accessing those teams, gain their advice in terms of that specific case. If you're still stuck on that one, Katie and other people, I would definitely use the SEN helpline because you'll be signposted to specialists who can help you. Okay, but essentially you must risk assess, communicate with the family, and I would say, sorry to bang on about it, colleagues, but fill in that record of conversation with the family, because if we get to the stage where families are dissatisfied with what the school feel able to offer, then or if you're having to compromise what is in their EHCP, then you can document that so that if anything were to be escalated beyond a school complaint, essentially you've got the documentation of what you've offered, what you can offer, what you can't offer, your rationale for it, and what agreements have been made. And I really would encourage you to do that. And that is on. I'm just going to take you back to it because it's important. Bear with me. That is on one of my slides, the first link to it. I'll just scroll back so you can see it. I think it's the next one.
Okay.
I will find it.
While you're scrolling.
Oh yeah, here's oh, it's in here. It's
Yeah.
in that link there, leading send, what settings need to consider. That has been updated. It's in there. Okay, that is what you need to know. Exactly, Katie's question will give you an outline of everything I've just said. Okay.
And the performer is in the send release. There's a link, I think, on the third slide.
Yeah.
In the send
Thank
release
you.
that went out at the beginning of the week.
Thank you. Oh, brilliant. Yes, that's what I was looking for.
It's on Tanya's slide.
It's because I'm trying to present, and yeah, thank you, Kath.
I think it's
there
the
you
third. Keep going. Next one. Record of conversation.
Record of there it is. I don't know if you can see my arrow. Bullet point 2. Yeah, Kath's right. And I'm sorry that there are so many links, colleagues, but actually they will give you the documents that you need. But this is one of the key ones, your record of conversation. It's not statutory. Devon don't necessarily want you to return it, but I would fill it in because it gives you that evidence trail of what you're doing to support families at this time.
We've got a question around one-to-one reading, Amanda. There's a couple of people that have talked about one-to-one reading. Some people where they're using staff at home to do one-to-one via video link if they're working from home. There was a question around safeguarding.
Yes.
Someone else has commented back that they obviously follow the safeguarding procedure in school, and that the calls are recorded and parents have to be in earshot, and that's another school's response. Any more comments from
no, I think
that one?
No, I think that's really good practice, and I think recording the sessions covers you, as well. And yeah, that I don't know who made the comment back, but absolutely, that sounds great. And again, just document somewhere that that's what you're doing. Yeah. But it's great if those pupils can get some one-to-one reading, or if you feel worried about one-to-one using a member of staff from home and you're thinking about safeguarding and it's making you feel a little bit uncomfortable, then do group reading, do paired or group reading, and that way it perhaps feels a little bit more manageable. But that good practice in terms of safeguarding, recording the sessions, your staff are trained in safeguarding. You make sure of that when they're in school, so you would expect exactly the same rules to be adhered to if they're working from home. Any more?
Right. The one I can see is, how are you managing reading with pupils via Teams? There are lots of suggestions following that today. People seem to be using ebooks. Purple Mash, thank you for that suggestion, Louise.
Oxford Owl.
I just thought if you want to add to any of those, Amanda, that would be great.
I can't see them.
Oh, yeah, Purple Mash.
But if people are putting in suggestions, then that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yes, thank you all. Really good.
And certainly, as I said at the beginning of this session, today is about questions, yes, but it's also about you sharing, and you're obviously doing a lot of that. So that's brilliant. Thank you, colleagues.
There's a couple of follow-ups that are really great in the chat around well-being, and there's one about the importance of maybe staff that are working from home, using them to make those phone calls home to some of those pupils, those checking in calls for the staff's well-being, to feel connected. There's a great one about you've got Jenny here running a virtual sort of staff well-being sessions after school, singing, social chat, mindfulness, to encourage staff to keep that togetherness, whether in different bubbles. Just another one aside from that, when you're talking about the SEND pupils, and particularly maybe the older pupils or any secondary pupils, if we've got any secondary colleagues here, some of those pupils that rely on those social groups, that after school club, that lunchtime club, that they normally meet together with different people, have different year groups, different bubbles. I know some schools are trying to recreate those virtually, even if it's once a week, to keep that social connection with some of those pupils where they're working across bubbles or different year groups or different classes. And again, that's just if any of that can continue, if you have the capacity. I think for that social connection for some of those young people, that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit, I think for some of them, it's a lifeline, isn't it?
Mm. Mm. Thanks for your offer, Anne, to support Katie. That's really kind. That's great that a part-time arrangement is perhaps working well for you. Anne's also said that she invites another adult into the call and chat, as they don't always have the option to record, which is fair enough. And she says that she's checked that out with John Galling, who's said that's fine. So it's really good. Katie, or indeed Anne, or anyone else, if there's anything that perhaps we haven't gone into sufficient depth, or other questions crop up or pop into your head, do let us know. You can email us, and we'll do our very best to explore in greater depth if that happens.
We've also just got something here from Alex around collection, order and collection boxes with weatherproof boxes outside of the front of school. And I know some other schools have done that as well, so that parents can come and collect those reading books to support those reading sessions. Just on another suggestion with some of the older pupils, where some of your schools may be using things such as Google Classroom, that opportunity to be able to, maybe with some of those older pupils and secondary age pupils, use those breakout rooms in the same conventional way
Yeah.
that a teaching assistant or an LSA might support some of those young people in the class. So that breakout room then takes some of that teaching, breaks it down a little bit more, scaffolds in a little bit more detail. That's something to consider. And also, if you've got any pupils that are normally used to having additional time for some of their activities, ensuring that that additional time in these remote lessons is still happening, particularly where they're working at home, so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Again, that was another suggestion that had come in.
Jenny, I've just picked up your point there. Best thing we did last lockdown was to invest in webcams for every class, so friends in different bubbles could stay connected. I think that's really important for pupils with SEND. It's harder for them to stay connected and to communicate. I think last week Kath brought up lots of really important points about allowing pupils to maintain the connection with one another as well. That those friendships are really important for their well-being. Andy, thank you. I can see that you're making a suggestion here. Jamboard through Google Classroom. It's been an excellent facility to enable children at home and school to collaborate on pieces of work together.
What a great idea.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yes.
I can see that one.
It's great. Yeah, that sounds really fantastic.
We're creating a golden nuggets to support the session today, which is just things that we've picked up over the last couple of weeks around supporting the SEND, and also some of the great things that are coming through in the chat, and we will make sure that comes out to you after this session. So please feel free to keep popping things in the chat that's happening at your school that you think might be good for somebody else to try, or vice versa. If you have any additional questions, please pop those in the chat, and we'll see what we can do to answer them.
And certainly the feedback we got from last week was colleagues appreciated just being able to have this facility in the chat to share ideas, not so much listening to us necessarily going through a presentation, but actually having the opportunity to share practice as you're doing. And we will definitely download and save the chat. So if you wanted a copy of it, it's not presented in a particularly palatable way. It sort of comes through on a text. But if there's anything in the chat you think, oh, I wish I could save that, or I wish I'd got that, then let us know. We'll email you the chat, and you'll be able to see. So you'll get the golden nuggets, you'll get a video link to the input. You've already had the PowerPoint slides and the zip file with the documentation in it. And we can send you the chat if that's something that you would like. Just drop us an email, we'll send it on.
I can see Andy's just put something up about moat is an excellent way for leaving verbal feedback for the children while reducing staff workload. Just on that balance of staff workload and well-being, I think there's a lot of information coming through where schools are offering as part of their provision an afternoon screen-free afternoon, and offering activities that parents might want to do at home that are different with pupils, and actually making sure you're giving that balance for that screen-free time, which again, great ideas coming through. Also could offer some capacity to do any one-to-one following up.
Yeah,
that's a really nice. I like that idea.
That's really great. And interestingly, next week's session will be about feedback and assessment. So that ties in rather nicely. Thank you, Andy. Actually, Louise has said we have been doing art therapy remotely. How interesting. It's amazing what can be done, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
No, it's incredible.
I really like the sound of that. That's
Yes,
exactly the kind of thing so many people just need. Yeah, can I join in, Louise? Just let me know when the sessions are.
Yes, please. Yeah, that sounds really great.
Oh, it sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think we could do with it. I think we could all do with it.
We definitely could.
Is there any more questions coming through?
Yeah, I was just about to say we've got a couple of minutes left. If you've got any more questions or comments, then do feel free now. It will stop at 4:15, but if you want to just type anything in, we won't stop recording just for a couple of minutes after that, so that you can write down or scroll through, do whatever you want to do with that information in the chat. We really hope that today has been of use to you. Tomorrow you'll get your release 3, and next Thursday we'll regroup for the Q&A. So it's all around assessment and feedback. Helen will take that session, so we'll have done one each, and we really hope that you can make it, and that will be of use to you. So ladies, is there anything else to add before we kind of officially sign off?
No, thank you all for coming and for your great comments, great suggestions. Really welcome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we do. And just on that last slide, there's just a reminder of what's happening next week and some other seminars and conferences that you might want to consider booking onto. But lovely. Have a great weekend when it comes at the end of tomorrow. Look after yourselves.
I think we've got one final question coming in from Carol about how schools are implementing their catch-up programme. And I think that's, if anyone's got anything they want to share, please pop that in the chat. I know that this is a balance for some schools where there is capacity to continue that catch up where at all possible on a one-to-one basis with small groups, breakout, with teaching assistants, with support staff. That's continuing. But I know some schools have had some challenges with that because of outbreaks of COVID and staffing and everything else. I think there's a really clear thing to be really clear on, is the bullet point around, if you've had to stop it, start thinking about what the gaps emerging from this lockdown that you may need to pick up and readjust that COVID catch-up strategy or approach as schools start to open. I hope that gives you some indication, Carol, and if anybody else has got any ideas they'd like to share on how they're using it, that would be great.
I see Anne's put Anne from the Beacon. Yeah, so thank you, Anne.
Yeah.
Offering to talk catch up if you need to.
Some of those the children, when a second lockdown happened, those children were already behind, weren't they? So the catch up is ever increasing. You can kind of, or there's a potential for that catch up to be increasing all the time, the gap to be increasing all the time. From talking to schools, some schools are using their teaching assistants to deliver some extra one-to-one sessions where they can, or small group sessions, and actually making use of the breakout rooms where they've got the technology to support that has been quite useful. In some ways, as teachers have adapted their teaching, perhaps they have to focus on the most important things, don't they? And we're all focused on the sort of the nub of what really needs to be taught to the children. That has helped those who need to catch up, because they're very clear about what they're going to learn, and that it's easier therefore for teachers to pick up on the misconceptions. But it's something that perhaps we'll regroup on in next week's session. We've tried to do that as we go on, to pick up anything extra that people have asked. So for next week, which is assessment and feedback, I've included a section on early years, because that was a request from week 1. So I'll bear your point in mind there, Carol, and see what we can provide or help you with next week.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Okay, colleagues, if you want to sign off, that's fine. We're not offended, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Equally, if you want to stay and chat and share ideas, then this room is open. So have a good week. I'll stop recording now, I think, ladies.